Before I saw The Sopranos, I was completely unaware of the variety of the story. For the longest time, I didn't even know that like half of the show is about Tony going to therapy and his mental state. While I expected a show about killing, drugs, and whores,
She was a hooah.
I was surprised by many of the things which happen in these almost 80 hours of television. This video is basically just talking about a couple of wonderful moments that I think deserve it. Basically a long remember when session.
Remember when is the lowest form of conversation.
This is something which I didn't appreciate at all the first time watching the show, and if you only saw it once, I urge you to rewatch the handful of scenes Jackie Aprile Sr. had on the show. Tony and Junior are fucking pissed at each other. They sit down with Jackie and he's like, "Hey, you Sopranos." He seems to have a talent for de-escalating situations, which really makes you wonder how differently things would go if he was around longer. He could have maybe calmed down the situation between Tony and Richie, Tony and Phil, Tony and Ralphie, Tony and Christopher, or even be a marriage counselor for Tony and Carmela. Hell, even Jackie Jr. would have gotten some fake degree instead of drowning in 3 inches of water. I think that both this and the Christopher Columbus episodes get too much bad reputation. Outside of the great Italian views, it's great to see our guys in such a different environment. But most of all, it's a giant character moment for Tony. Once he sees the Italian mafia, the real mafia, who have the police under control, Tony seems to realize how irrelevant his family really is. There's this moment when they are going home from the airport and see the New Jersey hellscape. And Paulie is completely happy to be back home, but there's this look on Tony's face. He's the only one to be disappointed with New Jersey after coming back. And I think it's one of the many moments where you see that he's smarter than a lot of the guys around him.
Could do this ourselves. Ninja style.
Father?
Despite all the dream sequences throughout the show, there's not a more beautifully bizarre moment than Sylvia and Christopher talking to the hitman. I honestly can't do justice to this scene by describing it, but I adore the idea that there's just this random house in Jersey somewhere, and once you enter it, you encounter a Lynchian nightmare. It kind of reminds me of playing like a Fallout game and encountering like a bizarre group of characters completely out of nowhere. What's even better is that Junior is the one who recommends them, and it's so relatable to have a family member recommend something, and then it's just fucking awful, but you can't really say anything.
Guy in there killed your father.
What the fuck are you talking about?
There's one single line that I find hilarious, and that tells you everything about Christopher that you need to know. Tony leads Christopher to the man who killed his father, and they talk about how Christopher's father died.
They hit my dad right outside my house, right? He's bringing home a crib for me?
Yeah. Well, no, he was outside the house, but he wasn't carrying a crib. He had a bunch of TV trays.
It's not enough that his father died, he needs to make it more dramatic in a stupid Hollywood way. Christopher is a lost soul, he wants some higher meaning, something better for himself, but his goals are very superficial. Again, he has a Hollywood version of meaning in his head.
He starts down here. He ends up here. Where's my arc, Paulie?
What's funny is that his revenge ends up being the least Hollywood thing ever. There's no clear admission by the cop, Christopher is high as always, and there's Magnum PI playing in the background. I think that Christopher wanted to make it more meaningful but didn't know how, so he just shoots up the room like a crazy person.
Are you inferring that you didn't take cash from Jilly Ruffalo to whack my father while he was carrying a TV tray for me to watch TV?
I don't know anybody named Ruffalo.
Livia's funeral was some of my favorite time I had with the show. From Tony not even being sad.
What are you gonna do?
Further vibing before the funeral, or the many perfect lines.
My dad's very old too. Thanks.
The idea of holding a funeral for a person everyone hates must have been a goldmine for the writers. Everyone pretends to like Livia until Carmela can't take it anymore and just drops a diss track on Livia.
Shit.
Carmela.
I'm sitting here thinking I should protect my children from the truth about their grandmother on the one hand. On the other, I'm saying to myself, what kind of example am I setting? Evading and smiling, passing out cheese puffs over a woman that we all know was terribly dysfunctional.
And what's even better, her father, the nicest guy on the show, supports her.
Let her talk, goddammit. Get down now! I'll speak if I want. Goddammit, who are you? Minister of propaganda? We suffered for years under the yoke of that woman. Years!
What I consider one of the best callbacks on the show is Livia's friend showing up too. The little lady who got ran over by Satan in season 1 and actually remembers Livia fondly.
She was my best friend. If anybody died or was in the hospital, I could be sure I'd get a call from Lee letting me know.
It's also interesting to think that the worst, fittest people you know probably have one person out there who will remember them in a nice way.
Look at this baby I caught right off the point here.
After Arte goes through his erring gangster era, someone needs to help him collect payment. And when Furio comes, that's it. We don't see what happens between the two, but our imagination does the work, and we know what kind of a man Furio is, and it works even better than if we saw what happened. Going back to what I said about expectations, the last thing one could think a mob show would have is a spiritual acid trip in the desert. Some people say that it's not very deep. After all, Tony has a new revelation every week, but I do think that Tony reads this moment as the universe telling him, this is who you are, and basically accepts that he's a terrible human being.
Very good. I get it! I get it!
Breaking Bad contains the worst, most cringy scene which involves a Marilyn Monroe imitation, right? In Camelot starts as a very sweet episode. Tony gets to meet his father's mistress, and through her, he gets to know more about his father. Slowly, the memories get less nice, and by the end, Tony realizes that the good old times kinda sucked ass. Tony sees her as a nice older lady, but when she gets flirty, the funniest cut in the entirety of the show occurs when we see Tony's reaction.
Hey, Mr. President. Happy birthday.
Speaking of great cuts, unintelligent people make fun of this one. But it is actually really smart as it calls back to the fact that the Sopranos take place in the Star Wars universe.
You know, I never asked you what your last name is.
It's Detrolio.
Finn Detrolio. My arch nemesis.
Speaking of great cuts for real, Tony plays with the idea of having an affair with Adriana in season 5. And after things go wrong and Christopher suffers because of rumors about Tony and his girl, they have a big altercation. And there's this moment at the end where it seems like Tony learned something.
But at this point now, it don't make no difference. Even if it wasn't true, it's what people think. They know you were out there scoring coke with her.
What do you care what people think? You know the truth.
I gotta live in the world. And now I look like Joe Jerkoff.
He understands, as a boss, he has to think about every single move and how his actions can ruin someone. And just as you think that Tony understands,
You know what? I might as well have fucked her. Thanks.
there's a lot of cool and subtle subtext and symbolism throughout the whole show, but none of them come anywhere near to the in-your-face of Phil literally getting out of a closet in the most impractical, dramatic entrances of all time. There are so many things that happen in the show's final episode, but one overlooked little detail is that Agent Harris is just cheating on his wife with a woman who is not satisfied in the slightest. And I think it's such a perfect, unimportant detail. It's one moment where some part of his personal life is shown to us. He's just an asshole, like everyone else.
Turn that off.